This can also be found under rendering, render to texture. And the render to texture here is, we have our path set, which I'm just going to ignore. But if you wanted to, you could set this here. What we want to do is go to Objects to Bake, and we want to make sure that the plane demo, so our plane, is selected. Depending on the scene that you're using, is that typically the object channel here will be set to 3. Alright, and the edge padding is 2. The edge padding right here is a color bleed on the UV template. Alright, so it's actually going to bleed out 2 pixels of that color, which is helpful so that we don't get extra texture seams. Now, just scrolling down, is projection mapping we will ignore at this time. What we want to do is go to mapping coordinates. Is that depending on the scene that you're using, is that sometimes the mapping coordinates will be set to use automatic unwrap, channel 3. What this means is that it's going to apply a flatten map to your model and basically destroy the unwrap that you've already done. Since we've already done 2 unwraps now, is we want to use existing channel. We need to designate which existing channel we're going to use though. Is that, are we going to use channel 1 or channel 2? We want to use channel 1 because channel 2 is our current UVs, and we want to take the current UVs and transfer them to the old UVs. If this doesn't work, we are going to have to load up the UVs and do a couple other things, but that's why we had to save off that .uvw file earlier on. So we want to make sure this is set to channel 1. Now we can go to our output window, click on Add, and we want to pick Diffuse Map. I'm going to click Add Elements, and under Add Elements we have selected element common settings. So right now it's just a diffuse map. We have the enabled diffuse map here, and this is important to have that checked. And then we come down to file name and type. Alright, this is where the location of the map is going to be outputted. So I want to make sure that I'm in the right folder, which is my plane folder. And I'm just going to call it, I'll just keep it the name plane demo diffuse map.tga. And I'll just save it off as 32 bits per pixel. So I've designated the location of where it's going to be outputted. Next we have the target map slot. And we have a whole list of map slots that we can place. We don't actually want any map slots because what this is going to do is take our map and transfer it to the active slot in the material editor. And this isn't a finalized map, so we don't want to do that. Our element again is diffuse map, and we can set the background if we don't want it black to a different color. We don't care as far as what color it is, so we can just keep it black. Then we get to the sizing. Is that the map that is on the plane is a 2048 by 2048 map. The map that we outputted originally is 1024 by 1024. So since this is going to be a 1024 by 1024 map, we want to set this to 1024 by 1024. Once we've done all this, is that the map itself doesn't output to the source location until you hit the render button right here. So we can hit the render button now, and you'll get this pop-up that says missing map targets. I'm just going to hit continue and give it a couple seconds while it renders this off. There's 2 things that you should be aware of. Is that the reason that you see all the details on the plane here is because I have cranked up the self-illumination on my material editor. If I just reset my material editor and rendered it again, I'll get this overwrite file, which I'll overwrite, and this would be the result, or something similar to this result. Either way, it really doesn't matter because this render here just tells us that the render is complete. Alright, that the render to texture has been completed. We don't actually need this file. Alright, so we can actually close this, like so. Is that, again, that's just as a temporary file. What we want to do is that once we render this, is we want to go to this location, so my work plane, and look for the plane underscore demo diffuse. So I'll go into Photoshop once again and open up, and there it is, plane demo diffuse map. And what we see, or hopefully, is you'll see that all the UVs, or all the texture information that we'd painted on here has now been transferred over to the original UV template. And this is how we save ourselves a lot of time as far as preventing seams. There are a couple areas like here, at basically the top and bottom of the planes, that are problems that we're going to need to fix. But, I mean, the amount of detail that we've added to this plane in the limited amount of time we've worked on this far outweighs the little or the few areas that we need to fix. So this is huge as far as speeding up our workflow. So this looks good and everything, but we can make it look better, because right now it's just a series of flat colors. One of the ways that we can make it look better is introduce shadowing, alright, and more depth to our model. This also gives us the ability to do real-time rendering, so when we're importing to a game engine and not having to use the internal lights of the game engine. So I'm going to go back to 3ds Max now. I'll close my render to texture for the time being. And we want to use our map channel 1. So what I'm going to do is I'll just clear out, so I'll reset my material editor slots, go to my diffuse map, bitmap, and instead of using my Targa or my diffuse map here, I'm going to use the plane demo diffuse on my model. And I can delete my unwrapped UVW for the time being, because I don't need that right now. So if we take a look at this render here, and we have the texture applied like so to our model, but it looks pretty good. What we need to realize though is that when I click on or crank up the self-illumination, is that ideally this is what we would see in the game engine. So we end up with this plane that's almost glowing in the environment. So we want to be able to add in extra shadows, because inside the game engine typically your assets, your meshes will not cast shadows. So I'm going to go back to my material editor, and I'm just going to right click to clear this off. And we're going to just create a quick lighting solution. So I'm going to go to my lights, I'm going to go to from photometric to standard, then I'm going to press skylight. All I want to do is place one skylight in the scene, and it doesn't matter the location of where this skylight is. Alright, for this skylight, for this type of light, the skylight, it does not matter where the location is. The only thing that you need to make sure is that you don't add multiple skylights. Alright, you only want to add one. So immediately after I place the light, I'm going to right click so that I can't start placing 100 more of these skylights. Once I place the skylight in my scene, I can take a render, and now it looks like we have self-illumination back on. And the reason is that the skylight does not work correctly with the default renderer. So, to enable the skylight correctly, so we can press F10, or we can click on the render scene dialog box right here to open up our render scene. What we want to do is go to advanced lighting, and right here, when we click on advanced lighting, we'll see no lighting plugin. We want to click on the no lighting plugin and go down to light tracer. When I activate the light tracer is that we can adjust some of these settings. Is that the rays per sample, typically you would want to increase, as well as possibly the bounces, depending on the scene that you're trying to create. For the purpose of us, we're just going to keep these settings as default, and the reason is because of render time. So once I've activated the light tracer, like so, and it says active, is that this works with and work for free. And we have that ability. The one thing that I try to do though is that the bottom of the plane itself tends to get bright. And the reason is that the way the skylight works is basically it's creating a dome around the entire object and shooting rays in towards the plane. So a way of deflecting it basically is that I go into my top view and I create a plane for my plane, and I just put that plane underneath my model. And then what I can do is take a render again, and this does take some time. And what this does is it gives me a shadow for the underside of the plane. Alright, and we typically want that so that this area isn't completely bright. So once I have the plane in the right location, or in a relatively good location, I can then click on the plane, press 0 to open up my render to texture once again. And this time, most of our settings are the same. All we need to do is jump down to our output window here, click on delete to delete the diffuse map. And I'm going to click on add and add a lighting map. I want to click on the dot 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 so I can set the location of where this file needs to be saved to. And I'll just call it plain demo lighting map.tga. Make sure that it is set to 1024 by 1024 and hit render. I'll hit continue and now give this some time to render off. So now that this is finished rendering off, again you can see that we have shadows here, but this again is just a temporary file, so we don't need that. So I can close this, and I can close this right now and jump back into Photoshop. I'll go to File, Open, and open up the diffuse light map now. The light map is a black and white image, as you can see. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the lighting information and transfer it over to our color information. So I'm going to hold down Shift, or actually have both of them visible like so. I'm going to hold down Shift, and on the lighting map layers tab here, I'm going to click on the background layer and drag, while still holding down Shift, onto the color map canvas. And if I hold down Shift while I'm doing this, it will snap it to the dead center like so. So then to see the effect, I can change my blending mode to multiply. And now I get the shading information applied on top of the color information. If at any point the shading information is just too strong, is that we can take the fill value and just drop it down to like 75, 80%, so that it's not as powerful. I haven't edited any of the actual original base texture, but with just this simple information here, I can do my file save as, Targa, and I'm just going to call this final map. And I'll just save it off as 24 bits per pixel. I'll come back into 3ds Max, and once I have the lighting map set, I really don't need the light or the light skylight or the plane, so I can delete those. Then I can just go into my material editor and I'll just replace this texture here. So I'm going to click on the active shader, go to my diffuse where it says M here to go inside there, and right here where it says bitmap, I'm going to click on that so that I can pick on the final map Targa. Open that, apply that to my model. And the one thing that we want to do is that we have no lights in our scene. If I take a render, we're probably not going to notice much of a difference. But if I crank up the self-illumination to 100% and then take a render, is what we'll see is that all the lighting information that we had from a skylight has now been transferred to the map itself. So we're getting all these extra details so that we get a real-time render. So instead of taking 4 or 5 minutes to render, is that it only took less than a second. And this is the idea behind real-time textures and real-time models, is that we don't want all the extra expenditure of time or resources to generate something that looks like this. And when we're doing lighting information for a vehicle or for an object, is we want to do general lighting. Alright, so that's part of the reason that I had the plane underneath it, so that we get certain areas to be a little darker. And we don't have a direct light source or direct location of where the light source is coming from. It's all about general lighting so that we get shadows, so that it looks like if we add global lighting that doesn't affect our scene, that it looks like the plane is being affected by those shadows.
I just grabbed an image off Google, and this is not the exact plane, but when I was texturing it, I told you about the different panels that were on there, as well as the rivets that are there that are holding the plane together, and then we get to like the insignias for the Air Force or whatever. That's one of the last things that gets added to it. You can also see along the side there's more decals, and then identification numbers of the plane or markings of the plane. But you can see that there are a number of areas that have folds or separations in the metal, as well as rivets that hold the plane together. So that's what we really need to make right now, are the rivets and the different panels that go onto it. The windows themselves really need to be adjusted, is that this is a completely different style cockpit compared to what we have, and that's something that we'll have to definitely work out to get it a little more refined. But